It's been a real pleasure to have Dean with us the last couple of days up from LA, and our opening night, Back to the Future screening on Thursday was tremendous fun, but made all the difference having a true legend here with us in person. And we're just want to let you know that there are more talks coming up associated with this Back to the 80s season, so do check VIFF's website for details on those talks. And I can tell you one you won't find there yet, but which is confirmed. We will have Frederick Elms, the cinematographer for many Jim Jarmusch movies, and most famously Blue Velvet, here at the beginning of August, so look out for that. Nice. I need to acknowledge that we're on the unceded traditional territories of the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. And I think especially on a day like today, it's important to remember that Canada is not that old, but these lands go back millennia, and that there were people here before there were settlers. And we'd like to honor them. Devon Scott will be moderating this conversation. Devon is a cinematographer in his own right, an independent cinematographer and a colorist. He's also a podcaster. He's been working his way manfully through a podcast on the silent films of Ernest Lubitsch and working through the complete oeuvre, am I right?
Eventually.
Eventually. Which is a labor of love and then some. And he's also an educator at various colleges around town. So we're delighted to have Devon with us to host this event. Without further ado, I will let Devon take over from here and do the intro for Dean and run through the kind of order of play for you. But sit back and enjoy.
So, Halloween, The Thing, The Fog, Big Trouble in Little China, Escape from New York, Jurassic Park, Back to the Future, and Back to the Future Part 2 and 3, coincidentally. Apollo 13, The Mandalorian, West Wing. Who here has seen at least one of those? Raise your hand if you've seen at least one. Okay, who here has seen exactly none of those? So there's not many people currently living, cinematographers or otherwise, you can say that about. Dean Cundey's work has entered our cultural firmament in a way that very few other visual artists currently living have. He has not only defined, in more than just about anyone currently living, what the 80s are to us. I mean, Stranger Things has spent how many, like 20 seasons now trying to chase that look, but has continued to shape and form how our culture sees itself visually on screen since then. So I'd like to everyone give a rock star welcome to Dean Cundey.
Sparkling water.
Yeah.
Thank you. I just want to start by saying that I've got a lot of empathy for the Canadian culture because my wife Tisha is Canadian, and we met in Toronto, and we've been together now 27. She'll tell me. But I just want to say that because of that, I understand a lot of Canadian. I don't speak it very well, but I can understand it.
So when I say the word pencil crown, it's just
yeah.
Well, hopefully, we have some translators here to get through my Canadianness.
Okay.
But yes, welcome and thank you for making the time for this. This is a huge honor.
It's my pleasure completely.
Well, thank you. The first question I often like to ask cinematographers when I talk to them is, because this reveals usually more about the cinematographer than about the work, hopefully it's both. What does a cinematographer do?
Well, it's a good question because I've heard that actually described. What the director, of course, is in charge of all of the vision and telling the story. The art director is in charge completely of designing and building the sets, creating the mood and the style. The editor is in charge of putting it together so it's a cohesive story and yet emotionally involving. I had a producer at Universal showing people through, and people said, "Well, oh, yes, and what is the cinematographer?" And he said, "Oh, he's the guy who lights the set." So.
And is that true?
Yes. But of course, there's a lot more that goes with it. I sometimes think of the cinematographer as the bridge between the emotion and artistry and the science. And there's an awful lot of science that we have to manipulate. There was film and light and how much light exposes the film when you go out and read it, and then density and color and how far back to put a light, because the inverse square law, you had to understand that. Plus there's an awful lot of behind the scenes science that happens with special effects guys who are creating the illusion of the visual effects, and then also the early special effects guys who would do the rain and the on-set explosions and all kinds of stuff. So all of that involves this sort of sense about science that you have to understand and balance, and use that to tell the story, to create the emotion, create the illusion, all of the stuff that you go into a theater and just as an audience take for granted. You watch on this big white wall, and when it runs, you get sucked into the story, the emotion, the illusion of all of the stuff you're seeing. So the cinematographer is responsible for photographing, using all of the science, but also understanding the emotional, where the camera goes, how close it is, how wide the lens, all of this science is something that the audience should take for granted. They shouldn't be aware of it, but you as the cinematographer are responsible for involving the audience in the story, helping the director tell the story visually, and it's interesting because there are all kinds of directors, some who are very, very hands-on with the imagery, others who tend to rely on the cinematographer. I've had directors say, "Okay, so there's the scene. Now where does the camera go?" And it's up to me to understand the emotional content of the scene and how to not just photograph it and document it, but involve the audience in it. So it to me is an amazingly fulfilling kind of thing to do, because you can affect an awful lot of people, not just an audience in your hometown or your state or your country. I've been very, very pleased to travel to almost all of the world and run into people who've seen a film that I was privileged to be a part of. You know, and it's amazing to me that that it's an art form that's so wide-reaching, that involves all kinds of cultures and people and so forth. Basically, because you touch on the commonality of human emotion and storytelling and all of that. So well, I best describe it, I guess, as it's the guy who lights the set.
I get it now. I'll keep that in mind. So let's get into how you, as an artist, collaborate with these different directors, because you brought that up, and that's a thread I'd love to pull on, because when you watch a film shot by you, I mean, I was lucky enough in the past 2 days to watch films you worked on with a number of directors. Robert Zemeckis, I actually saw Romancing the Stone for the first time last night. There was a blind spot.
Oh, really?
And yeah, and then Back to the Future and Escape from New York a couple of days ago screened here to wonderful response. And all three, before that, I recently rewatched Jurassic Park, and all those films, directed by three very distinct directors, right? And yet I can see your work underneath that. I can go, okay, if you had told me who shot this, I might have been able to get your name, I think, from just seeing a nighttime exterior with a certain type of backlight. And so you mentioned that certain directors, they either tell you to put the camera here on this focal length and let's do exactly this. Others, you might basically be directing the visuals. What, between maybe the high-profile directors you work with, what stays the same in your work, and what visually on screen changes?
Well, staying the same is, I guess, the fact that we all use light to capture the image. So you have to understand where to put it and how much to use for a particular effect or emotional response. So I think that's a common thing. Understanding why a particular director would want to put a certain focal length at a certain spot is important, as opposed to saying, I wonder why he's doing that. It's understanding the storytelling technique of directors of all kinds that I've worked with, from Spielberg to I can't think of any.
We have John Carpenter.
Oh well, right. Besides them, I mean, down to the guys who are doing their first film, who are, interestingly enough, the first film guys sometimes are adamant that they are the artist, and they tend to ignore advice or suggestions from me, and others who say, just show me where to put the camera and why. And so it's an art form, and I think of it as the greatest art form ever invented. Now which sounds like a pretty highfalutin kind of thing to call it, but if you think about it, there's almost no art form in the world that isn't part of film, painting and music and architecture and photography and literature and everything that you can think of as an art form can be used in film for a very specific and dramatic reason. So I think of it as a great sort of culmination of all of the arts that man has invented, and it gets used to tell an emotional story, like is the intent of most art forms. So it's to me it's an amazing amazing way to tell human stories and inhuman stories.
One little aside that I probably forgot to mention at the beginning was that as far as the kind of timeline for today, Dee and I are going to be talking for a little while, and then at around 45 minutes, an hour in, we're going to open up to some audience questions. So start thinking of some good ones. I'm going to be fielding them.
You know, and I will only answer the good ones.
So to get really specific about this nature of the collaboration, I'm sure that having worked on as many films as you have, I mean, I certainly had this on the paltry number of films I've worked on, the director asks, hey, let's put the camera here, and you're thinking, what if we put the camera here? Or what if we went on a 50 mm lens or a 58 instead of a 50? How does that back and forth look when you and the director are trying to kind of bash this shot into shape?
Well, I think the collaborative technique is probably the most rewarding because there's not a lot of directors who understand this science aspect of what it is. So the manipulating the science and using that to tell the story is one important aspect. But the directors all, as I was saying, have different techniques and motives and so forth. And the some that I've worked with, well, actually a lot of them are open to suggestion, to a perspective that I can bring. And partly because, a lot of the directors have worked on relatively few films, not guys like Spielberg and so forth, but a lot of other directors, especially, beginning people. But one of the things that I find particularly rewarding and involving is the collaboration, and even with very experienced directors who can recognize that if I make a suggestion, they can use it or alter it or reject it or whatever, and being able to contribute is important for. I think everybody on a film, but especially for the cinematographer, to feel that the effort I put into thinking about the storytelling and thinking about what the image should look like. Should it be dark, light, colorful, not? So those are the kind of things that I really like to bring to the collaboration. And there are a lot of times that are particularly rewarding. Back to the Future has a lot of cases where Bob would say, well, okay, the scene is here, and they do this, and they walk, and then they talk. And very often I like to try to include the audience in a one-shot camera situation as much as possible, so that the audience isn't watching and then there's a cut, and your brain takes a fraction of a second to say, where am I? Oh yeah, I recognize this. Cut. Where am I? Oh, this is new. I wonder what. Oh yeah, okay. And cut. It can be very effective if used properly, but if it's used in a lazy way, because it was just easier to think of a two-shot and two over shoulders and pan with the guy as he walks or whatever. To me, like Back to the Future was a lot of fun because after a while, and having worked with Bob on Romancing the Stone, Bob would say, okay, so here's the scene, and okay, Doc, you and Marty, and he says, and they talk, and then maybe they get up and walk a little bit. But then for me to be able to say, oh, Bob, here's an opportunity. So when Marty says this, he can walk forward into his own close-up. We'll keep Doc back there. But he comes up to the lamp that makes him the center while he says something, and then as he turns, our attention goes back to, and then Doc, and then he sits down, and then Doc comes up and says, "Back to the future," and you know, yeah, trying to help the director choreograph for the camera, trying to help the actors understand that they're going to get their own special moment in this scene as opposed to being sitting there and just talking and cut. You know, it gives everybody a reason to be involved, and I think you do that with you know. And I mean, I think it's important to involve as many people as possible, crew members, you know, production people. You know, very often crew members, if they're only told, go and put that light over there and put a double in it or whatever, if they come up with a suggestion and they're told, no, I'll decide it, you know, they tend to step back and say, okay, I'll wait for instructions. And you miss out on perceptions and things that crew people have, because they are very educated, for the most part, in the filmmaking process. They can bring their own perspective of how to do something. You know, if I say, oh, let's put the light there, and he says, well, it'd be easier to hang it over there, and you say, oh, great, that's better. You know, everybody gets to be involved, and everybody is thinking and creating and devising what makes the movie move faster or look better or whatever it happens to be their particular sort of discipline in film.
You know, when I watch one of your collaborations with Zemeckis, I see so much of that Z-axis that's kind of towards and away from the camera movement. And Back to the Future, I felt this time, it might have just been the large screen, but the lenses felt a little longer too than, say, your work with John Carpenter, where I often feel like if I had to think of a Carpenter shot in my head, it's a X-axis, left to right, lateral move with a wide lens.
Right.
To what degree do you find yourself? Did you find yourself, especially when you're switching back and forth between these directors, having to almost change the language in your head? Do you have to go, oh right, this is a John movie, and we're thinking in this language now, versus this is a Spielberg or anyone else movie where you have to think in that. Do you learn that after a few times of working?
Yeah, I think so. You know, it's again, it's literally a language, you know, a visual language. And it's like any language, if you speak more than one or two or three, and you're lucky that way, I'm jealous, but also that, you know, when you go to a culture, you can adapt and be more efficient and effective in that particular culture if you know the language. And then you go to another culture and you learn how to be efficient and effective in that language. And if you're lucky enough to be able to speak different languages, then you can be more effective. And it's the same in film. You know, if you understand the language of a particular director, he likes wider lenses or longer lenses or static shots or moving shots or any of those particular kinds of variations on the language, you can adapt your own suggestions and effectiveness to the director, but at the same time, hopefully, introduce some new words and phrases in his language, so that, pardon me if I keep saying his or something like that, I know, I'm sorry.
I'm going to keep overextending the language metaphor, so I apologize.
Okay.
But how has the language of cinema, especially mainstream pop cinema that you've been so ingrained with, how has that language changed since you started your career, and why is that?
It's interesting. I grew up. I grew up as a kid very creative and encouraged in creativity. I went to film school, and when I graduated from that, I started to grow up in the low budget film, action adventure films and so forth, and you begin to actually learn the vocabulary, but also the syntax and conjugating your verbs. This is all in a hypothetical version. And so you start to learn, how to tell a story, what's effective, what's a fast, efficient way to do it, and over a period of time you develop, an understanding of it. And if you attend some screenings of the films you've worked on and listen to the audience reactions, where if they laugh or if they react or if they snore or any of the various things, then you can start to understand what you did right or what the director did right or what the director did wrong, and you remember you tried to fight him on that, or it develops over a long period of time. And I think that it started off with being what's the most effective, efficient way and low budget way to tell the story, and maybe elevate it a little bit. I remember at times doing things like the director would say, well, okay, so the girl comes into the bar, we'll see her, all right, then we'll cut to the guy at the bar, and then we'll cut to her, and she'll follow across, and I would say, hey, how about this? She comes in, stops and turns and looks, and we go over her shoulder, and then, oh, wait, what was that again? Well, we go over the shoulder, and we'll follow up into a two-shot, and then we'll gradually, oh, that sounds complicated. And a lot of times, it's because the director has, oddly enough, sometimes trouble visualizing. I've had a director, when I've done that, who would say, wait, what was that again? What? Oh, okay, no, I don't, okay, show me what's, and the director said, well, okay, I just have to explain, I'm not a very visual person. And I thought, well, that's evident. But why not, try to, adapt or understand or learn. But anyway, over a period of time, I've tried to maintain that kind of language. What has changed is style that gets imposed on us. A lot of people, I hear people say now about contemporary film, why is everything so dark? And it's one of those things that it can be dark, as long as it's not like the faces of the actors are dark or can't be seen if you're supposed to see them. And so I find that visual styles changes over a period of time, but the visual style can change and become darker, or become a more active camera. The Steadicam has allowed us to move the camera in ways that it couldn't easily before. So there's a lot of the language that changes, but it still has to involve the audience and touch them emotionally if you want the film to be accepted by an audience.
So by way of kind of illustrating this, let's say it's somewhere in the mid 80s, and you're being asked to light a nighttime exterior. The thing nowadays is probably the most common victim of this dimness. But say you're in that context. It's you're on the set. It's Romancing the Stone. You're in the Colombian village. You're having to light nighttime exterior. How do you decide where to put the first big light? We call it the key light. And where do you go from there?
Well, very good question. I think that a lot of times my process and directors I've worked with who I think are effective, the thought is no matter what the style, there are certain things that the audience has to see, and so you say, okay, there's two things I have to do is create visibility and understanding, and then also mood. And sometimes they go together, other times they're sort of opposites or not as carefully entwined. And so a lot of times I'll look at it and say, well, what are the moments where we have to see the character say something? Or it could be the back of their head, we hear them say it, and then they turn and we get a surprise with their emotion or whatever, and you start to analyze the content of the and the intention of the scene. And then there's also what is the place where this is taking place, what's the location or the set or the environment, and how do I create the mood that it's, is it dark and mysterious, is it nighttime? What do I have to see in order to understand where I am, but also create sort of the mood of where I am? Is it safe or is it dangerous or whatever? So there's quite a thought process that you go through in doing that, and so I think that I think it's multi-facets of reading a scene beforehand, saying, oh, I see it's about this or that. Let's hope that we get a chance to do that. And then when you get to the set for that particular scene and the rehearsals begin and the director has a input into it, then you begin to shape it. And even if the director has said, well, it all takes place over here, a lot of times you can say, well, let's follow the person over to lose them, and then they go back and so we'll give this character a moment without anyone being conflicted by saying, oh, there's a whole bunch of people, I should be watching all their faces, or maybe not, or whatever, And there's certain rules of the psychology of the image that you might say you have to be aware of. That, for instance, hardwired in our brains is the fact that one of the first things that we notice is movement. Going back to the idea there could be something lurking in the bushes over there, and it's going to attack us. And over a period of time, we've never lost that thing that if there's movement, our attention goes to it. So, do you need certain movement? Do you want to avoid conflicting movement? You have to analyze that. And how do you set up the shot so that the car driving in the background doesn't distract us from the girl crying or whatever? So movement is something you analyze and use or avoid if you don't want conflict. Typically also in a scene, our eye goes to the brightest spot, the brightest object or whatever. Sometimes it doesn't matter, it's stationary, it's a window. We see it, we understand it, okay, now we move on to the characters talking. But other times there can be something bright and it distracts us, especially if there's added movement or something like that. So you have to understand this the psychology that drives our interpreting a visual image into a storytelling one or an emotional moment. And I think it's important because you can use the movement. It's stationary, the character's talking, saying something, and then there's movement in the background, your eye goes there. And is it, you know, is it okay? Or is it that guy with the knife lurking? You know, that kind of stuff. Learning about those things, and you know, a diagonal line leads our eye to the point. So perspective on a street or any kind of diagonals, if we want them to lead our attention there, we can use it. If we don't, then we should be aware of that and maybe block the apex of the thing with something else or whatever. So there's an extremely good book written by a friend of mine, the Visual Image, I think it's called, or whatever. Bruce Block is his name. And he analyzes all of this kind of stuff, starting with the simple things, the stability of a square, you know, the round thing that can be moving, the triangle, the pyramid upside down, balanced on a point, looking unstable. And there's this whole series of things that are fascinating to think about, and that we use, you know, as part of our process.
So bringing together the two little subjects you brought up, movement and also knives, Halloween, that's often used as an early example of the use of the Panaglide system, and I probably need like 3 asterisks on that, because if we some of us might know what a Steadicam is. A Steadicam is an invention of, you know, I like to tell my students it was named by a guy named John Steadicam, but
that's an easy way to remember it.
Exactly, but it's a system
Brown.
That or who's that?
Garrett Brown.
Great, and that's my way of covering up the fact that I cannot remember Garrett Brown's name.
Yeah.
But it was revolutionary in that it allowed you to connect the camera to the operator's body in a way that smoothed out the movement in a way the handheld didn't. And Panaglide was kind of an off-brand version of that.
Yeah.
And if anyone wants to hear more about this, Professor Katie Bird down in Texas has a fantastic some writing and videos on this. But how did that being introduced into your kind of visual creative workflow, how did that influence you? What did that?
Well, it's influenced us tremendously in this industry. And what's interesting is that when cameras got smaller and they could be actually held on your shoulder and you could walk with them and move in places where you can't get a dolly, you know, going up and down stairs or you know, through a labyrinth of rooms, that gave some mobility. Unfortunately, if you put the camera on your shoulder or just hold it, a lot of times there's unwanted movement. And we go through life. Our life is stable. It's everything is a Steadicam shot because our eyes and our brain compensate for you know, any jerking movement. We see life walking as very stable. So Garrett Brown invented the Steadicam in order to get rid of this connection to the human body and allow us to, you know, when you become skilled using it, to smoothly move as if we were a character, or we are the audience going through something in a very stable, non-distracting method. And it's, you know, we used it quite a bit on Halloween when and before it had been used for a shot here or there or whatever. John and I and some other folks conceived of the fact that by moving the audience through this world, this emotional world, we could either be the bad guy, Michael Myers, or we could be following, or we could just be moving through this world or whatever. And that it had more uses than just one shot of moving through a crowd or something. So it was, when we did that, a lot of people started to say, "Oh yeah, that's a good idea," and they stole our idea and have not yet sent a single check. But that's a never. Don't get me started. But it was fascinating to be part of increasing the awareness and the use to the extent now that it used to be. After Halloween, I would say, well, let's get a Steadicam. And how many, is there a budget for that? And they'd look down and the production manager would say, I don't see a Steadicam listed. No, we can't get one. And you say, well, it'll help us save some time. And well, we just don't have it in the budget. And over a period of time, the production managers would say, oh, they use that thing, okay. So they would come to me and say, we've got 3 days in the budget for a Steadicam. You can have any 3 days. Oh, well, that's good. How about if we want 5? No 5 days, 3 days. And now you look at it and it's a standard part of the camera package. If the Steadicam operator is usually the B camera operator, or very often now the A camera operator, are trained in effective use of the Steadicam, and it's become just another tool that we rely on to be part of the storytelling.
I know that I see quite a few kind of local cinematographers in the audience. This might be of particular interest to them. Nowadays, I mean, one kind of the version of the debate we often have on, when we're prepping for our films is producers saying, "Can't you just get by with the gimbal?" And in other cases, can't we just be on the Steadicam all day, every day, or a gimbal all day, every day?
Mm-hmm.
Are there? I kind of conflated two questions, so I'll start with this one. Are there any risks to overusing something like the Steadicam or a gimbal?
Yeah, I think so. When the director starts to say, "Oh well, I can't use a stable shot on a dolly, or just a slight move that's stable that doesn't draw our attention to it," then the director is being driven into a style that may not be effective for a particular movie or scene or whatever. I remember that when the Steadicam became started to become very popular, I would hear production managers say, as you sort of imply, "Oh, great, we don't have to rent a dolly, and we don't have to have a dolly grip, and we don't have to have, and we can get rid of the fluid head, or we can get rid of the gear head, or whatever." And they began to think of it as, an either-or situation. And effectively, it's not. It's just a tool. It's like saying we were only going to buy or rent one particular kind of light. They're all going to be 1Ks LEDs, and that because we can get a cheap package of that, and no, you're taking away your brushes and your palette, your colors. For painting an effective emotional scene or movie. So, it's always about giving yourself enough variety in tools, and then also saying, how can we use these tools effectively? What's the intent of the scene and the characters and the actors' performances, and how do we effectively involve the audience in those things?
And one specific tool that I find of great interest in your work is the choice to shoot either spherical or anamorphic. And anamorphic, for those of us who aren't haven't seen the giant beast of lens that are anamorphic lenses, is a specific way of capturing an image that squeezes it. It was designed to fit a wider image onto a narrow film strip, but whenever you see a film that's wide, 239 to 1 across the screen, it's often anamorphic. For an example of this would be most of your work with John Carpenter, Escape from New York, Big Trouble in Little China. The Thing has famous anamorphic kind of look to it. And then other films like Back to the Future and Jurassic Park are spherical, taller screen and less distortion in this case. How do you choose when to use one or the other?
Well, I like the anamorphic ratio, the wider screen, because again, that's how we see. We see much wider than we do up and down. And we get peripheral vision, and you can see more of the world. There's a face standing in front of you, but you're also aware of the background behind them or whatever. So I like the anamorphic ratio. But there are other cases. For instance, on Hook with Spielberg, it was all about all of those boys and all of the island and a lot of stuff. So we shot anamorphic. And then a couple weeks before we wrapped on Hook, Stephen came to me and said, Universal wants me to do this little dinosaur movie. Would you be interested? And, can you imagine telling Steven Spielberg, no, I would really rather not.
I really want a vacation now.
Yeah, I'm not. So I said, oh, absolutely, I'd love to. And when we got to talking about visual style, he said, well, the dinosaurs are taller than they are wide, so let's do 185. And at first my thought was, well, maybe anamorphic would be good, because then you include a lot of the jungle, you include faces reacting, but I could see his point, and so that he was very comfortable, I said, oh, okay, sure, why not? So you in theory, you choose your aspect ratio for the intent or the content of what you want. And I personally, I think that anamorphic, you can create a smaller screen by blocking something or keeping it dark back there or something in the foreground, so that your attention is only on a smaller area. And it gives you a little bit more creative choice in order to, do your storytelling.
And one just curiosity on my part, anamorphic is notoriously a bit, especially in those days, tougher to model for CGI or for the VFX dinosaurs. Was that a factor in your thinking, or did that kind of not enter into it?
No, because we didn't have CGI at all in mind when we started prepping.
Stop motion initially, right?
Yeah, it was going to be, sort of the old-fashioned stop motion miniature dinosaurs, one frame at a time, move them, and create the illusion of movement and so forth and so forth. And I saw some tests. I actually stole I acquired the images of the stop motion tests that were being done. And then as we were prepping, they came down from ILM, and Dennis Murin, who was in charge of the effects, said, Stephen, we think we can do these dinosaurs in the computer. And he said, how is that? Well, there's this whole new, aspect of special effects in the computer. And he said, well, great. Let me see them. And he said, well, we haven't done it yet. But wait right here. And a week later, he came back and showed some very crude but effective and smooth-moving wireframes, just checkerboards of the dinosaur. and the movement was very great. And Stephen said, well, that's better than stop motion, but it doesn't have any skin on it. And Dennis said, wait right here. He came back a week later. Sometimes Dennis says 2 weeks, but and there was a skin on it, but it was gray. It looked like it was made out of clay. But the movement and the skin movement was amazing. So Stephen said, well, what about like texture on the skin and shadows? And Dennis said, wait right here. And came back in a week or so. And there was this great texture and coloring, and the T-Rex was running through shadows from trees that weren't really there, but and Stephen said, that's it, that we're going to commit to that. And we did. We ended up, he was only allowed to have, I think, 150 CG shots because of the cost and time. And so as he was going through all of the storyboards, he would say, okay, now this one is great. Yeah, we've got that one. Oh, this would really be good too. Is it? How many is that? And then, well, it's up to 150 already, Steve. Oh, okay. Let's get rid of that one, and we'll substitute that. You know, that's how meticulously he was being held to the number of CG shots. Now it's like 2,000, 3,000, doesn't matter, whatever.
Redo them in the last minute.
Yeah, and it change things. But in those days, it was so new, and it was actually, as I understand, the first, CG photorealistic creatures that had ever been done. And it was an amazing experience to be part of puppets, creatures that had rubber skins or were made out of painted fiberglass or whatever, and to light them with a realistic feeling that also enabled the CG people to recreate that lighting and combine the two. So it was an amazing experience.
Oh, that's incredible. I have time for one more question on my own before I have to start throwing it to the audience. And I feel like I want you to talk about the past for a second, because when I teach cinematography, my favorite video to show is this video of James Wong Howe, who is one of my favorite cinematographers. He shot Sweet Smell of Success, The Thin Man, Body and Soul, endless incredible films in the 30s and 40s and 50s and 60s. And you mentioned that you had attended maybe the very class that was in that video at UCLA.
That could be. I haven't watched the video yet, but thank you for sending it to me. But I was at UCLA Film School, and I was in my last year, and there was one semester left. And I heard the rumors that James Wong Howe, the famous two-time Academy Award-winning cinematographer, was going to teach practical cinematography. And I immediately went and said, I want to join up. And they said, oh, the class is full. And I said, no, you don't understand. I specialized in it, and also this is my last semester. And they said, okay. So I got into the class. It was such a revelation, because so much of film school is sort of like theoretical. We had our cinematography class was this thick book that had been written by the instructor, and it went through such things as the color spectrum and the multi-layers of film and blah blah blah, and it was fairly dry. And when I heard about this class and got in, I was so delighted, because the class consisted of on our new sound stages, they would build a little 3-wall set, a window, a door, and a back wall. And Mr. Howe would say, okay, everybody, we're going to photograph this this scene here with this girl we'd had to stand in or whatever. And he would say, okay, so you're the camera operator, you're the camera assistant, you're the gaffer, you're the grip, and all these people were suddenly like, whoa, I mean, we actually have to do something. Oh, well, this should be interesting. So each session, we all were effective. And he would say, okay, now we want to put a little splash on this back wall. So put a 2K or a 1K up on the this tall stand and give us a, no. You start with the top riser and keep your hand away now, lock that, that's right, okay. Now, but before you go up there, make the doors, and hey, we would go through this whole process of training us in the practical aspects of what we would have to do. And the camera operator was told to set up the shot that would follow the girl from the window to the whatever. And then the next session, it was like on Tuesdays and Thursdays or something. Thursday would be in the theater. And we had this new facility with the new theater and a big screen, and he would project sections of his movies, and he would talk about it and answer questions and so forth. Then the next Tuesday, we would go back to the stage, and he said, now you're the key grip, and you're the, and we all had to learn these actual practical skills of, what we were going to do when we got out, and how we might, in fact, learn something that would allow us to, actually get employment or progress. So it was an amazing experience, because that Tuesday it was no longer a seedy hotel room. He said now it's an elegant lady's boudoir, and we would learn the process of using the equipment, but also the thought process of how you would paint with light, as it were.
And with that experience in mind, is there anything you think that the younger generations could learn from the old masters like James Wong Howe and the less old masters like yourself?
Well, almost as old. I think that it becomes easier now because we don't have the ponderous process of getting film, loading it into a camera, shooting it, developing it, making a print, projecting it, cutting it together physically on an editing machine, and all of the stuff that we had as this process. Now, frankly, you could do a lot of it on your phone. You don't have the, focal lengths and stuff like that. But as long as you don't hold it vertically, because that's stupid. Horizontally. But you don't get to shoot anamorphic with it. So, but there are, video cameras that are readily accessible. You don't have to send it for developing. Frankly, you can download it on your own computer, and if you have a simple editing program, you can cut it together and say, oh, did I make the right choices in shots and so forth. And people can make their own short films and get more experience, but also exposure, no pun intended. Well, maybe there was. With their own creative sensibilities and creating samples of their work that are available. I had to beg the editors on some of my films that I shot the second camera on or whatever, to give me clips, pieces of film, physical pieces of 35 millimeter film that I would splice together to make a reel. And that's what got me some of my first jobs was, literally at one time the director for a film that I was going to be the gaffer on. I walked into his office to talk about the schedule or something, and he slammed down the phone and said, "Oh, now what am I going to do?" What do you mean? I heard, well, the DP just got a better job and he quit. And can you imagine anything so unprofessional? And I said, "Oh, that is a terrible thing. I have my reel out in the car." And I showed it to him. He had a moviola. Yeah. But, and I showed it to him. He said, "Okay, fine. I'll take a chance." And, that was how I got started. But it was a ponderous process because I had to collect these clips and these pieces and these outtakes and cut them myself together so they, flowed from one scene to another, even though we're different movies. And so I found a way to do that, but now it's so much easier that with video you can, if you can con a really good camera out of somebody, a friend, or a company that'll loan it to you or whatever, you can shoot stuff. And if you can also, somehow get a hold of some lights, you can light, a scene or whatever, and end up with something that is the equivalent of my clips that I had to steal, borrow. And you can put together a reel that may get you the opportunity to do something. And and I've always said, when you come out of film school, take any job you can get, no matter how small, whether they're going to pay you, whether you're just a grip, whatever. No matter what you do, you learn something about the process, the protocols, the discipline, and get any, and I did makeup, and I did, grip work, and I did all kinds of prop, and then camera assisting and dolly work and anything I could get, I would take, even if I wasn't paid, and I would use that as a practical learning experience. Film school teaches you what you're going to have to learn, because when you get out, then it's the real world. And I was fortunate to have the James Wong Howe class, because that was some of the most practical learning and teaching that had occurred.
Well, thank you so much. I think we can open up the audience for questions, and I would say I have one little word of advice. Never ask a cinematographer to pick their favorites. But aside from that, it's open season. We have a very enthusiastic question back there. Yeah.
Okay. One aspect of film history I'm always interested about is the transition from film to digital, and I was wondering what was the first project that you shot digitally, and what were some of the challenges from film to digital, and how'd you deal with them?
I'm going to quickly rephrase that, or just for the posterity of the microphone and for all our ears. The transition to digital, what was your first digital project, and what did that entail for you?
Interesting. I have to remember so far back. Digital was kind of a progression. I mean, it isn't like suddenly there were all these cameras and everyone said, "Oh yeah, let's forget film." It was a process of...
Unless you're in Denmark in the 90s.
Well, exactly. But I think that I remember being introduced to digital in kind of an odd way. There was a TV director who did live action television, game shows and things like that. And he wanted to do a kind of a fictional story, and he had acquired some video cameras, which were pretty big because there was nothing nearly as small as your phone now. And so they were regular kind of video news cameras. They were still smaller than the big studio ones, but and that was my first experience, and which was an interesting one because you could look at the monitor and evaluate the lighting and determine what you were going to do. But an intriguing aspect of it was because this was all studio video stuff. I would light it and I would look at it and say, okay, let's make that wall a little darker, and we'll put a backlight on it. And I'd run over to the monitor and I'd look, and it looked the same. And I'd say, oh, okay, well, put another double in that light to make the wall a little darker, and let's take down some of the light on the face. So then I'd go to the monitor and it would look the same. Finally, the guy who was doing the video work came out and said, how much darker are you going to make this? I keep turning it up and turning it up. I said, no, this is different than the game show. But we're trying to make it dark. So go back to the original setting and we'll start over. And that was kind of an intriguing introduction to video.
Yeah, any others? We have one very enthusiastic there.
My question, Dean, and Devin, feel free to answer as well, is what I usually like to ask people in film is basically a lot of people come to the understanding that the kind of golden age of filmmaking is slowly coming to an end. And what I mean by that is in an age with artificial intelligence and cutting-edge color science, but in particular volume stages and surround stages, there's no need to go to a practical location anymore, or at least soon that might be the case where you don't have to fly a crew out to Saudi Arabia or Antarctica. You can just do it in a air-conditioned studio. So I was just curious what your input on that might be in the coming years.
So, Dean, has technology killed cinema?
Oh, that's the good short version. No, what was being mentioned by, what was your name?
Dayton.
Stacy?
Dayton.
Dayton.
Yes.
Dayton. If those of you who are in the business, Dayton, you'll be out in the lobby for a thorough thrashing. But thank you for your question, because it's an extremely important one. On The Mandalorian and Boba Fett, I've used the largest volume, I think that exists, 75 feet across, 25 feet high, fills almost 360 on a stage. And there was an awful lot of backgrounds that would show up on there for us to shoot, because the world of The Mandalorian and all, as we know, is a completely artificial created one. There's nothing on the set or in the background that is off the shelf. So it was extremely effective in that. But it came with rules. We couldn't get a certain distance close to the screen. We had to choose our lenses carefully, because otherwise there would be more ray and weird things. It restricted how you could light, because with the practical lights on the set in front of the volume, they could be reflected off, or they would shine on the screen or whatever. So you were restricted to how you could do it. So also, when you're on a practical location, you can change your mind. You can move the camera over here. You'll get the town on the hilltop in the background. So there's a lot of flexibility and freedom in that way of doing it. That if you don't have all of the backgrounds that have been recorded for the volume exactly as you want them, you are stuck with that. So it's an amazing new tool that is pointing the way, but it is not the be-all and end-all now for it.
We have, I think we have the Muppet Show people on the stage with the canes coming, so I'm going to promise one more question. Let's see, we have one question there.
So you've mentioned post-production a couple of times. I was wondering, as a cinematographer, how much have you been able to work with editors and in the post-production process, and has the amount of access that you've been able to have in the past been comparable to how much you would like or how much you think a cinematographer should be able to work in post?
How do you interact with post-production folks and editors, colorists, anyone like that, and how has that changed throughout your career?
Well, it's interesting because when in the days of film, you could go and view something that the editor had been cutting, and it was physical film, and it would go through a moviola or would go through a Steenbeck or some kind of a mechanical device. And I remember being invited sometimes to looking at sequences for a particular film, but you had to go there and he would have to unload the film from here and go to over here and say it's on the here it is. No, that's not it. Okay, here, this one. And then he would load it, and then you would watch and say, well, the scene where the guy comes through the door, okay, run it down, run it down, run it. And so it was a ponderous process compared to now. You can go to the editor and say, I'd like to see the scene with, oh yeah, there it is, and run it down to where, okay, and so the digital process has become a lot more flexible. I appreciate it when an editor allows me or requests that I come and look at cut stuff. Sometimes because it's just to say, oh, this looks great, or now in the next scene we have to remember that, and you would go off and shoot it according to what the editor's desires were. The new magical part of it is the DI, the color process that at the end, where you can not just have 3 lights like we did with film, red, green, blue, that would kind of correct what we had done, and just very little control over density, how bright or dark it was. Now, I really love the idea of being able to go and, paint in the next step. Just that wall back there, make that darker, put a window in there, turn that down. Okay, now desaturate this because it's just too much color. It's the flashback or the whatever, and you can take the color out from black and white to sepia to whatever you want to do. And so I see that arm movement on his watch, looking at his watch. That must mean something. So I really love.
You can continue.
Okay, I love the digital world very much because it gives us so much creative control over the image, not just a little bit like it used to be, but and it makes it easier because a lot of times I'll say, okay, this looks great. Oh, that wall is too bright on that warehouse over there. Oh, you know what? Rather than sending a crew over and putting doubles in or moving the lights or doing a whole bunch of stuff, you say, I'll take care of that later. Save it in post. And if you think about that and don't have people standing in front of the wall or whatever, if you know what you're going to do, you can save a lot of time and use the time where it's needed in the foreground with the characters and the camera movement and so forth. And later they can take that wall and make it darker. They can shape it, make it darker on the top. All kinds of things that can be done by the contemporary technology.
Well, that was 3 spectacular questions, and I think we've run out of time, but Thank you so much, Dean. I want everyone here to give Dean an unreasonably loud applause.
Oh,
Please.
no.